deep inside a glacier, more than 15,000 feet above the ground, something has been sleeping under 50 meters of ancient ice for thousands of years. Something the powerful governments have worked very hard to keep hidden. Something that, if proven real, would not just change the history books, it would shake the entire Middle East to its core and force world leaders to make decisions they are absolutely not prepared to make. Stay right here, because by the time this video ends, you will never look at a mountain the same way again. You are watching History Chronicle, the place where buried truths finally come to the surface. Hit subscribe right now, because what we're about to share has been classified, suppressed, and quietly fought over by intelligence agencies for more than 70 years. And it all begins with one mountain that refuses to give up its secret. Mount Ararat stands where Turkey, Armenia, and Iran all share a border, three nations that rarely agree on anything. It rises from the earth like a warning, a sleeping giant of a volcano that climbs nearly 17,000 feet into the sky. For centuries, it drew explorers and believers toward it like gravity. But something shifted. The obsession stopped being about faith and started being about power, because modern satellites do not make things up. Here is what actually happened. In the summer of 1949, American military reconnaissance planes were flying slow, careful passes over eastern Turkey. The Cold War was in full swing, and every inch of terrain near Soviet borders was being photographed. One of those pilots looked down at the northwestern face of Ararat and stopped breathing for a moment. At roughly 15,400 feet, half buried inside a glacier that had been creeping forward for thousands of years, there was a shape, not a cliff, not a shadow playing tricks. A real physical shape with edges that nature never builds. Straight walls, parallel lines. What looked like internal chambers inside a massive dark structure frozen into the ice. The film was rushed back and developed under tight security. Analysts spent hours studying every frame. And then, without a single word to the public, without any announcement at all, every image was sealed inside classified government archives. Why? Because the object measured roughly 150 meters long. That number matched almost exactly what ancient texts described as the size of Noah's Ark. And in 1949, on the doorstep of the Soviet Union, telling the world you may have just found a biblical artifact was not just historically explosive, it was a geopolitical nightmare no government wanted to touch. So they buried it. But secrets are like ice. They do not hold forever. The decades passed. The images stayed locked away, but the mountain never stopped speaking to the people who lived in its shadow. Generation after generation of shepherds in the villages below Ararat told the same story. In the hottest summers, when the glaciers pulled back further than usual, the side of something enormous would peek out from under the ice. Not a rock, not debris. Something with flat sides and straight edges that looked like a wall. An old man named Georgy Hagopian said that as a young child in the early 1900s, his father walked him up the mountain to touch the object itself. He described it as a massive structure made from incredibly dark, almost stone-hard wood, sealed with something that looked like thick lacquer or tar. What made his story impossible to dismiss was simple. Details he described matched the classified photographs he had never once been allowed to see. Let that sink in. Then, in 1959, something extraordinary surfaced far below the summit. A Turkish military pilot named İlhan Durupina was doing aerial mapping of a plateau several miles from Ararat's base. When he reviewed the footage, he could not move. Pressed into the ground below him was an enormous formation shaped exactly like the hull of a massive ship. It was not vague. It was not abstract. It looked as though something colossal had been driven nose first into the earth and left there for thousands of years while the soil slowly swallowed the soil slowly at whole. The formation measured exactly 157 meters long. The biblical measurement for Noah's Ark, when converted from ancient units, falls between 150 and 160 meters. That site is now known as Durupina, and in recent years, a research team used ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the surface. What the machines found shook researchers deeply. About 6 meters underground, the radar picked up angular structures far too perfectly shaped to have formed by accident. Long central corridors, side passages, what appeared to be compartments beneath a flat upper surface. Soil samples from inside the formation told an even more striking story. The organic material in that soil was double what the surrounding land contained. Potassium levels were elevated, the pH had changed, and marine sediments were found, the kind left behind by ancient ocean water, containing the remains of shellfish. Dating placed those samples between 300 and 500 and 5,000 years old. One soil scientist put it plainly: if a massive wooden vessel had decayed in that spot over thousands of years, the ground would show exactly those chemical signs. And that is exactly what the ground shows. Yet official science barely acknowledged it. Why? In 2010, a research group pushed through brutal conditions and reached ice caves above 13,000 feet on Ararat slopes. Inside those frozen tunnels where no organic material should have survived, they found enormous fragments of cedarwood, a tree species that has never once grown naturally anywhere near that altitude. Independent labs in multiple countries ran carbon dating on the samples. Every result came back with the same answer: approximately 4,800 years old. That number lines up almost perfectly with the ancient flood timelines described across multiple civilizations on multiple continents. This should have made every front page on the planet. Instead, the world received silence. Researchers who tried to publish findings were told the evidence was not strong enough. Applications for real excavations were smothered in bureaucratic delays. It felt as though the academic world had decided, without ever saying so out loud, that some answers are simply too dangerous to give. And here is why that decision makes terrible sense. Proving a man-made structure exists at 15,000 feet on Mount Ararat does not just confirm a religious story. It proves that a catastrophe of unimaginable scale wiped out most of human civilization thousands of years ago, and that someone built something large enough to survive it. That is not just history, that is a political earthquake. The Turkish government has quietly made the situation worse by locking down access to the mountain. The northwestern plateau, the precise area where the anomaly appeared in every classified photograph, is now closed to all international teams. Even Turkish universities have had their access denied. Private drones are banned from the airspace. Military engineers have been seen operating on the upper slopes. Something is happening up there, and no one is being told what it is. Now think about what official confirmation would actually mean for this region. Ararat sits on Turkish soil, and Ankara has made clear that anything found within its borders belongs to Turkey. But for Armenia, this mountain is not geography, it is identity. Ararat is printed on the Armenian national coat of arms. It is the spiritual center of a people who have considered this mountain sacred for as long as their culture has existed. The idea that Turkey could claim ownership of the most significant artifact in all of human history would not go over quietly. Iran watches from just across the border with its own calculations. And beyond the region, the moment Noah's Ark is confirmed, billions of people across Christianity, Islam, and Judaism will demand access to it. Every major government will compete to shape the story. Religious movements will mobilize millions of followers. International organizations will demand the site be treated as the property of all humanity. In a region that is already full of tension and unresolved conflict, adding the single most spiritually and historically powerful object ever found would be like dropping a match into dry fuel. Control over Noah's Ark would mean control over historical truth itself. The nation that holds that ground gains a kind of influence that no weapon or economic sanction can match. One that works directly on the deepest human need for meaning and origin. That is exactly why every expedition to Ararat is watched by intelligence agencies. That is why radar scans trigger diplomatic conversations behind closed doors. That is why the mountain is monitored by satellites that officially do not exist. But here is the thing that should keep every world leader awake at night. The question everyone has been asking is wrong. The world has spent decades asking whether the Ark is real. That is not the actual question anymore. The photographs exist. The radar data exists. The carbon-dated wood exists. The soil chemistry exists. The eyewitness accounts exist. The evidence has been there all along. The real question, the one intelligence agencies have been quietly answering for 70 years, is this: what happens to the world the second that evidence becomes impossible to ignore? Because the glaciers on Mount Ararat are melting. Climate change is pulling the ice back faster than at any point in recorded history. Structures that have hidden beneath 50 meters of glacier for decades are now moving closer to the open air, on their own schedule, with no regard for what any government wants. Nature does not file paperwork. Nature does not wait for diplomatic consensus. The ice is retreating, and whatever is inside it will eventually surface whether the world is ready or not. This is not a mystery waiting for a hero to solve it. It is a countdown already in motion. At the History Chronicle, we will be here when it runs out. The mountain is not giving anyone a choice anymore. A discovery is coming. Through a leaked report, a commercial satellite image, or simply the next brutal summer that strips another 10 meters of ice from that ancient slope. The only real question left is whether you are paying attention when it happens. Subscribe to the History Chronicle right now. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the Ark is real? Do you think this has been deliberately hidden? Because the conversation starting in those comments may matter far more than it seems. The next chapter of history is already being written. We will see you there.